Has our discussion so far today been meaningful and or helpful? Yes or no? Hands up if yes. Okay. So we're going to move a little faster. I'm going to lay some stuff out before lunch so that you won't be silent in lunch. You'll have something to talk about. The problem solving process. Let me ask you this. Put up your hands. Yes.
Can I go back 1 second?
Absolutely.
You've heard of iReady?
Yes.
So in our school, we have shown huge gains with iReady at the beginning of the year, up through the 3 diagnostics, 2 years we know it. But that we don't see that same growth in our in-state testing. So does that mean that those scores are invalid? Does that mean that we need to look at something different?
So the
So
the question is this. It does it right before the break. So here's a hypothesis I have, is that the batteries last 1 hour and 30 minutes. So can I shout? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So what he asked was, look, we use iReady. We've been using it for 3 years. It showed great progress on iReady and not as much on the state assessments. So I happened to have a conversation yesterday afternoon about iReady in an area where 19 school districts are using it. So, and the question was, overall, how good is iReady? So in that discussion, the conclusion was, we don't know yet. There was no 100% for it, 100% against it. But I can tell you why there's a difference with, I would put a paycheck on it, why there's a difference between your iReady scores and your state scores. And that reason is that iReady is not measuring the same stuff as is on the state assessments, or is not aligned with it. So, remember before I talked about that PRS, probability of reading success? Any benchmarking assessments, any progress monitoring assessments have to be calibrated to predict outcomes. So the iReady could be calibrated to do that. All they would have to do is to look at who performed high on iReady and who performed high on the state tests, who performed low, and where the noise in the system was. Because those assessments can be calibrated to predict outcomes. But they're not. So they're independent measures that don't have a strong relationship. Neither is bad. You're trying to use the iReady to predict state end of game. Maybe it wasn't designed to do that. It was designed to measure progress along the way. So it can be fixed. It's not a huge fix, but they would have to put all the iReady data, and I'm making this very simple, all the iReady data and all of the high stakes assessment data into the system. They could then say, here are the iReady stuff that predict outcomes. This does not. Use it for progress monitoring, but if your big question in October is, how are they going to do in May? Then use the subset of the iReady data that's related to those. Does that make sense? And that's the difference between a progress monitoring tool and one that can predict outcomes. It's not that it's bad. They just haven't said what parts of it predict high stakes and what parts of it have no relationship with it. So the parts of it that have no relationship are getting in the way of it predicting the outcomes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess my only other question would be is if iReady is increasing those skills, shouldn't those skills still translate into increased scores?
The question is, if iReady is showing increased skills, shouldn't the increased skills show it on the high stakes assessment, right? It may or may not. If the skills, and I don't want to get down to the weeds, but if the skills that it's showing the greatest strength on are not necessarily the ones that are preponderance of items on the high stakes tests, then what they're making the most progress in isn't what's being assessed. Now, you don't want to throw that out, because progress monitoring and predicting are two different questions. So you would say, which things that iReady measures does the high stakes testing measure? And look at only those to predict. But keep everything else to measure progress. Make sense? So let's suppose that you teach algebra, and you have an advanced algebra class, and you know what the standards are. And because of your kids, you're able to really address the standards. But you spend half of your time in and all of that kind of stuff that you're really proud of and the kids love. None of that is measured on the test. But you measure it. But what predicts how they're going to go over the test is those foundational units that were tied to the standards. You sure? Okay. So it's not that the iReady is bad or your high stakes assessment. You just have to parse out what relates to each use of iReady. And it could be fixed. You can do it with grades. You can predict outcomes. You have in high school, you have first 9 week grades, that's 25% of the kid's behavior. 25% of the kid's behavior is enough to predict in most cases what's going to happen at the end of the year. That's a whole fourth of the entire year. Are they going to turn 180 degrees? Not many of them. So you can do it with any piece of data, because it's not what you're measuring, it's how well what you're measuring actually predicts. So you're using iReady for two purposes. It may not be designed to do that second purpose. But don't throw it out and say one is bad or the other is not. But it can be fixed. Okay? All right, let's go to lunch. You come back at 1. If you're trying to get back to your